November 15th, 1943. The frost-covered fields of eastern Ukraine stretched endlessly under a pale morning sky, broken only by the skeletal remains of burnt farmhouses and the occasional glint of metal from concealed positions. Sergeant Viktor Kozlov of the Red Army's 3rd Guards Regiment adjusted his standard-issue Mosin Nagant rifle and squinted through the morning haze, confident that his years of urban warfare in Stalingrad had prepared him for anything these rural battlefields could throw at him. The German forces across the valley seemed manageable enough, perhaps 200 infantry with standard equipment, nothing his experienced unit couldn't handle with conventional tactics. What Kozlov didn't realize was that among the recently arrived volunteers shuffling behind him stood a quiet farmer whose homemade hunting rifle would soon redefine everything the sergeant thought he knew about warfare, precision, and the devastating power of rural ingenuity applied to military conflict. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how one mockingly dismissed farmer transformed from agricultural outsider to legendary marksman in a single night, proving that sometimes the most unconventional weapons in the most unexpected hands can change the entire course of a military engagement. The morning briefing had been routine enough. Major Petrov outlined their objectives with mechanical precision: advance 3 kilometers, establish forward positions, and maintain pressure on German defensive lines that had been harassing Soviet supply convoys for weeks. Intelligence reports suggested moderate resistance, approximately 2 companies of German infantry, well entrenched but lacking heavy artillery support. Standard operating procedure called for coordinated infantry advances supported by their remaining T-34 tanks. Among the assembled soldiers stood Dmitry Volkov, a 42-year-old collective farm worker from the Poltava region who had been conscripted just 6 weeks earlier. Unlike the standard-issue equipment carried by his fellow soldiers, Dmitry clutched a peculiar-looking rifle that immediately drew attention. The weapon appeared to be a modified hunting rifle, extended and customized with what looked like agricultural materials. Hand-carved wooden adjustments, modified sights, and an unusually long barrel gave it an almost makeshift appearance that seemed completely out of place among the military hardware. Sergeant Kozlov noticed the unusual weapon during equipment inspection and approached with the kind of condescending smile that veteran soldiers reserve for naive recruits. He examined the rifle with exaggerated interest, turning it over in his hands while shaking his head in apparent disbelief. "Well, well," Kozlov announced loudly enough for nearby soldiers to hear. "What exactly is this supposed to be, farmer? Did you bring your rabbit hunting equipment to fight the German army?" Dmitry remained silent, his weathered hands steady as he accepted the rifle back. The other soldiers chuckled, and Kozlov continued his inspection with growing amusement. "This thing looks like it was assembled from spare barn parts," the sergeant continued. "Nice toy rifle. Farmer, I suppose you think you're going to take down German machine gun positions with your little hunting piece? Maybe you should stick to digging trenches and leave the real fighting to actual soldiers." The mockery rippled through the ranks, and several soldiers gathered to examine what they perceived as evidence of rural naivety. The rifle certainly appeared unconventional, longer than standard military weapons, with modifications that suggested amateur craftsmanship rather than military engineering. Its wooden stock bore the marks of careful but obviously non-professional customization, and the extended barrel seemed almost comically oversized for infantry combat. What none of them understood, including Sergeant Kozlov, was that Dmitry had spent 25 years perfecting his marksmanship skills, hunting in the vast Ukrainian countryside. Every modification to his rifle represented years of experimentation and refinement. The extended barrel increased accuracy at extreme ranges. The customized stock accommodated his specific shooting position preferences. The modified sights incorporated lessons learned from thousands of successful shots at distances that would challenge military snipers. Furthermore, Dmitry had been hunting wolves, wild boar, and other dangerous animals that required single-shot precision under life-threatening circumstances. His rifle, while unconventional in appearance, was actually optimized for exactly the kind of long-range precision shooting that would prove devastatingly effective against enemy positions. As the unit moved forward toward their assigned positions, Kozlov assigned Dmitri to rear guard duties, effectively removing him from what the sergeant considered real combat responsibilities. This decision reflected the common military prejudice against civilian volunteers, who lacked formal training and standard equipment. The assumption was that farmers, factory workers, and other civilian conscripts needed to be protected from serious combat until they could be properly trained and equipped. The German positions occupied a series of low hills approximately 800 meters from the Soviet advance positions. Intelligence reports indicated standard defensive arrangements, machine gun nests, concealed rifle positions, and observation posts that had been harassing Soviet movements for several days. The German forces appeared to be primarily regular infantry with experienced leadership, well entrenched and prepared for conventional assault tactics. Initial Soviet attacks proceeded according to standard doctrine. Infantry advanced in coordinated waves, supported by available artillery and the few remaining tanks that had survived previous engagements. However, the German defensive positions proved more sophisticated than intelligence had suggested. Concealed sniper positions began targeting Soviet officers and key personnel with devastating effectiveness. Within the first hour of engagement, the Soviet advance had stalled under precise enemy fire from positions that seemed impossible to locate or neutralize. Machine gun teams that attempted to establish suppressing fire found themselves targeted by invisible marksmen who seemed to anticipate every movement. Radio operators, medical personnel, and officers became priority targets for German snipers who demonstrated remarkable skill and coordination. The conventional Soviet assault tactics that had proven effective in urban warfare seemed inadequate against this rural defensive network. Major Petrov recognized that his unit faced a tactical problem that required unconventional solutions. The German snipers were systematically degrading Soviet combat effectiveness by eliminating key personnel while remaining virtually undetectable. Standard counter-sniper tactics required specialized equipment and training that his unit currently lacked. The situation demanded immediate action before German defensive fire could completely halt the Soviet advance. During a brief tactical pause, Dmitri approached Sergeant Kozlov with a request that initially seemed absurd. He wanted permission to move forward to an exposed position approximately 400 meters ahead of current Soviet lines. From this position, he claimed he could identify and engage the German sniper positions that were causing such devastating casualties. Kozlov's initial response was predictably dismissive. The proposed position offered minimal cover and would expose Dmitri to concentrated enemy fire. Furthermore, the sergeant remained convinced that the farmer's unconventional rifle was inadequate for serious military engagement. The request seemed like suicide disguised as heroism. "Absolutely not, farmer," Kozlov replied firmly. "You'll get yourself taken down in the first minute, and we'll waste time and personnel trying to recover your body. Stick to your assigned position and leave the dangerous work to trained soldiers." However, Major Petrov, who had been monitoring radio communications and casualty reports, began considering more desperate alternatives. His unit was taking unsustainable losses from precisely the kind of long-range precision fire that conventional tactics seemed unable to counter. The situation required either withdrawal or some form of unconventional response. When Dmitri repeated his request directly to the major, explaining his extensive hunting experience and familiarity with long-range precision shooting, Petrov found himself weighing military protocol against tactical necessity. The farmer's confidence seemed genuine, and his modifications to the hunting rifle suggested serious technical knowledge rather than amateur enthusiasm. After consulting with his remaining officers, Major Petrov made a decision that violated standard military hierarchy but reflected battlefield pragmatism. He granted Dmitri permission to attempt his proposed mission with specific conditions designed to minimize risk and maximize potential effectiveness. The plan required Dmitri to advance under cover of darkness to a forward observation position that offered clear sightlines across the German defensive network. From this position, He would attempt to identify and engage enemy sniper positions using his knowledge of rural concealment techniques and his modified hunting rifle. The mission would begin at sunset and continue through the night, with radio check-ins every 30 minutes. As evening approached, Dmitry prepared his equipment with the methodical care of an experienced hunter. He cleaned and inspected every component of his rifle, verified his ammunition supply, and studied the terrain features that would guide his approach. Unlike the military equipment carried by other soldiers, every item in Dmitry's kit reflected years of practical field experience rather than standardized military doctrine. His approach to the forward position demonstrated hunting skills that impressed even skeptical observers. Dmitry moved through the darkness with complete silence, utilizing natural terrain features and vegetation for concealment in ways that suggested intimate familiarity with rural stealth techniques. Within 2 hours, he had reached his intended position without triggering any German defensive responses. The forward observation post offered exactly the advantages Dmitry had anticipated. Elevated slightly above the surrounding terrain, it provided clear sight lines across the entire German defensive network, while offering natural concealment among rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation. More importantly, the position allowed him to observe German positions from an angle that revealed concealment methods, invisible from conventional Soviet positions. Through his modified sights, Dmitry began identifying German positions with the systematic approach of an experienced hunter tracking prey. He catalogued machine gun positions, observation posts, communication lines, and movement patterns with patient precision. Most importantly, he began identifying the individual sniper positions that had been causing such devastating Soviet casualties. The German snipers had established what appeared to be a sophisticated network of mutually supporting positions, each carefully concealed and positioned to cover specific fields of fire. Their concealment techniques relied on urban warfare principles that worked effectively against conventional military observation, but were less effective against someone trained to identify rural camouflage methods. Dmitry's first target was a German sniper positioned approximately 600 meters away, concealed among the ruins of a destroyed farmhouse. The enemy marksman had been systematically targeting Soviet radio operators, effectively disrupting battlefield communications. Standard military doctrine would require calling in artillery support or organizing a coordinated infantry assault to neutralize such a position. Instead, Dmitry applied hunting principles that treated the enemy sniper as dangerous prey requiring single-shot precision. He spent nearly 40 minutes studying the target's position, movement patterns, and shooting routine. Like an experienced hunter waiting for the perfect shot, he identified the exact moment when the German sniper would be most vulnerable. When Dmitry finally fired, the result exceeded even his own expectations. The modified hunting rifle delivered devastating accuracy at extreme range, instantly neutralizing the German position without alerting nearby enemy forces. The shot had been so precise and silent that surrounding German positions remained unaware that one of their key defensive elements had been eliminated. Encouraged by this initial success, Dmitry began systematically working through the German sniper network with methodical efficiency. Each engagement followed the same patient hunting approach: careful observation, precise positioning, and single-shot elimination. His intimate knowledge of rural concealment and movement allowed him to remain undetected while systematically degrading German defensive capabilities. The second target was a machine gun position approximately 700 meters away that had been preventing Soviet infantry advances. The German crew had established excellent concealment and fields of fire, but their position relied on urban camouflage principles that Dmitry could penetrate using hunting observation techniques. After studying their routine for nearly an hour, he identified a moment of vulnerability and delivered another precisely placed shot that instantly neutralized the position. As the night continued, Dmitry's systematic elimination of German positions began creating cascading effects throughout the enemy defensive network. Radio communications became increasingly frantic as German commanders tried to understand why their carefully positioned defensive elements were being neutralized by an invisible enemy. The psychological impact of losing key positions without identifying the threat began undermining German defensive coordination. By midnight, Dmitri had successfully engaged 8 separate German positions, each elimination demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of his modified hunting rifle and rural combat techniques. The German defensive network that had seemed impregnable just hours earlier was systematically collapsing under pressure from a single marksman using unconventional equipment and tactics. Soviet forces monitoring radio intercepts began detecting increasing German confusion and defensive reorganization. Enemy units were being redeployed to counter a threat they couldn't identify or locate. The systematic precision of Dmitri's attacks suggested professional military sniper activity, but German counter-sniper protocols failed to locate any enemy positions. Major Petrov, monitoring Dmitri's progress through regular radio communications, began recognizing that the farmer's unconventional approach was achieving results that conventional military tactics had failed to accomplish. The sustained elimination of German defensive positions was creating opportunities for renewed Soviet advances that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. Sergeant Kozlov, who had spent the evening coordinating conventional defensive positions, gradually became aware that something extraordinary was occurring in the forward areas. Radio reports described systematic elimination of German positions by unknown forces, creating tactical opportunities that his standard military training hadn't anticipated. The possibility that the mockingly dismissed farmer might be responsible for these developments seemed almost incomprehensible. As dawn approached, Dmitri had successfully neutralized 12 German positions, including the most problematic sniper nests that had been causing devastating Soviet casualties. His systematic approach had created a corridor of reduced enemy resistance that would allow Soviet forces to advance with significantly lower risk. The German defensive network that had seemed so formidable was now compromised beyond effective restoration. The psychological impact on German forces was becoming increasingly apparent through intercepted radio communications. Enemy units were reporting systematic losses of key defensive positions to an unidentifiable threat that seemed to anticipate their every move. The precision and consistency of the attacks suggested professional military capability, but German intelligence couldn't identify any Soviet forces capable of such sustained long-range precision. German commanders began implementing defensive measures designed to counter professional sniper activity, increased patrols, repositioned observation posts, and modified communication procedures. However, these conventional counter-sniper tactics proved ineffective against Dmitri's hunting-based approach, which relied on rural stealth techniques rather than military sniper doctrine. As the first light of dawn illuminated the battlefield, Dmitri prepared for what he recognized would be his most challenging engagements. Daylight would provide improved visibility for his targets, but would also expose his position to German observation. The transition from night hunting to daylight precision shooting would require adapting his techniques to changed tactical circumstances. His 13th target presented the greatest challenge yet, a German observation post positioned on elevated terrain approximately 900 meters away. The position offered excellent fields of observation and was defended by multiple personnel with sophisticated equipment. Conventional military doctrine would require coordinated artillery support or infantry assault to neutralize such a well-defended position. Dmitri approached this challenge with the patient methodology that had characterized his entire mission. He spent over an hour studying the position, identifying personnel patterns, equipment placement, and vulnerability windows. Like a hunter stalking particularly dangerous prey, he waited for the optimal combination of positioning and opportunity. When the shot came, it demonstrated the full potential of his modified hunting rifle and years of precision shooting experience. At nearly 900 meters, the elimination was so precise and unexpected that the remaining German personnel required several minutes to understand what had occurred. The psychological impact of losing such a well-defended position to invisible enemy fire began triggering broader defensive panic. The 14th through 18th eliminations followed in rapid succession as Dmitri exploited the confusion and defensive reorganization caused by his previous successes. German forces, attempting to respond to what they perceived as a coordinated sniper attack, began repositioning in ways that actually exposed them to his continued observation and precision fire. The 19th target presented a unique challenge, a German communications position that had been coordinating defensive responses to his attacks. Eliminating this position would disrupt German command and control capabilities, but would also alert enemy forces to his general location. The tactical decision required weighing immediate advantage against longer-term mission security. Dmitry chose to engage the communications position, recognizing that the strategic value outweighed the increased risk of detection. The shot, delivered at maximum range for his modified rifle, successfully eliminated the target while triggering immediate German countermeasures designed to locate his position. As German forces began concentrating fire on his suspected location, Dmitry prepared for his final engagement of the mission. The 20th target was the most dangerous yet, a German counter-sniper team that had been systematically searching for his position since the elimination of the communications post. Engaging this target would require exposing himself to return fire from professional military marksmen. The final engagement became a deadly competition between hunting expertise and military sniper training. The German counter-sniper team possessed superior military equipment and professional training, but Dmitry's intimate knowledge of rural concealment and unconventional positioning provided critical advantages. The engagement lasted nearly 15 minutes, as both sides attempted to gain decisive positioning. When Dmitry finally took the shot, it represented the culmination of 25 years of hunting experience applied to military necessity. The precision and timing were perfect, instantly eliminating the German counter-sniper threat while avoiding return fire that could have ended his mission. The 20th confirmed elimination completed a night of tactical success that had fundamentally altered the battlefield situation. As Soviet forces prepared for renewed advance operations, the impact of Dmitry's individual mission became apparent throughout the entire tactical area. The German defensive network that had seemed impregnable 12 hours earlier was now compromised beyond effective restoration. Communication lines were disrupted, key observation posts were eliminated, and defensive coordination was systematically degraded. Major Petrov's tactical assessment confirmed what radio intercepts had been suggesting throughout the night. The German defensive position was no longer sustainable. The systematic elimination of key personnel and positions had created tactical opportunities that conventional Soviet forces could now exploit with dramatically reduced casualties and increased probability of success. When Dmitry returned from his forward position that morning, Sergeant Kozlov waited with an expression that combined amazement, embarrassment, and newfound respect. The radio reports had made it clear that the mockingly dismissed farmer had accomplished something that trained military snipers had failed to achieve: the systematic neutralization of an entire enemy defensive network using unconventional equipment and rural hunting techniques. The sergeant's apology was brief but genuine. "I was wrong about your rifle, farmer, and I was wrong about your capabilities. What you accomplished last night was extraordinary." Dmitry's response reflected the quiet confidence of someone who had never doubted his own abilities, despite others' skepticism. "Hunting dangerous animals teaches patience and precision, Sergeant. German snipers are just different prey, but the principles remain the same." The subsequent Soviet advance proceeded with minimal casualties, advancing through areas that had been impossible to approach just 24 hours earlier. The systematic elimination of German defensive positions had created a corridor of reduced resistance that allowed rapid territorial gains with dramatically improved tactical efficiency. Intelligence reports later confirmed that Dmitry's 20 eliminations had included some of the German army's most experienced marksmen, personnel whose loss significantly degraded enemy defensive capabilities throughout the entire regional sector. The psychological impact on surviving German forces created cascading effects that influenced subsequent defensive planning and resource allocation. Within weeks, reports of the farmer-turned-marksman spread throughout Soviet military units, inspiring similar recruitment of civilian specialists whose unconventional skills proved valuable for specific military applications. The success demonstrated that civilian expertise, properly applied, could complement traditional military capabilities in ways that conventional doctrine hadn't anticipated. Military historians would later analyze Dmitri's success as an example of asymmetric warfare principles. Unconventional methods applied by skilled practitioners could achieve tactical results that conventional approaches failed to accomplish. The integration of civilian hunting expertise with military necessity created capabilities that neither approach could achieve independently. The modified hunting rifle that Sergeant Kozlov had mockingly dismissed as a toy was eventually studied by Soviet military engineers interested in understanding how civilian modifications had achieved such remarkable battlefield effectiveness. The technical innovations represented years of practical experimentation that military research had never pursued. For Dmitri himself, the transition from farmer to military marksman was temporary. After the war, he returned to agricultural work in Ukraine, rarely discussing his military service except among fellow veterans who understood the unique psychological challenges of precision warfare. His rifle was carefully maintained and stored, a reminder of extraordinary circumstances that had transformed agricultural tools into instruments of tactical necessity. The German forces that had seemed so formidable were ultimately transferred to other sectors, their defensive effectiveness permanently compromised by losses they never fully understood. The systematic nature of their elimination created tactical vulnerabilities that influenced subsequent military planning throughout the regional theater. Years later, when military historians interviewed surviving participants, Sergeant Kozlov would describe his initial assessment as one of the most embarrassing mistakes of his military career. "I learned that day never to judge capabilities by appearances," he would often conclude. "That farmer taught me more about precision and patience than all my urban warfare experience combined." The battle itself became a case study in military academies, demonstrating how conventional tactical assumptions could be overturned by unconventional applications of civilian expertise. The integration of hunting skills with military necessity represented a form of asymmetric advantage that traditional military doctrine had never considered. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.